Mark, welcome to Deakin Prime, and thanks for joining us for a chat. One of the key characteristics of today's world is the constancy of change. People often talk about change fatigue, but you raise the concept of change apathy. How do you see that people are responding and coping with change?
I think people struggle with change, just the speed of the change and the extent of it. And clearly change impacts us all. But leaders can't just get impacted by change. They actually have to drive the change and have to shape the future. And so that requires them to understand the changes and to adequately respond. And I think that's the message, that let's not be fearful of the change, let's not be indifferent to the change, let's observe it, understand it, and then strategically respond to it. And I think it's imperative that leaders do that, and it all begins by at least understanding the context, the changes and the trends, not being worried by it, and then they're in a position to respond.
Yeah. And with technology and internet content and smart devices, people have now got much greater access to content, to knowledge. How's that changing the way people learn and work together?
Well, it is a just-in-time learning environment now. People feel that they can quickly access anything, anywhere. And so I think it is about the shorter, it is about the participation. People want to co-create rather than just download something else and have their voice, have their say. I think we've created an empowerment culture which is great, because it means people take ownership of their own learning, people share in it and are active around it. A whole goal of teachers and educators generally has always been, how can we get the students engaged in the process rather than just being spoon-fed? And I think that's a good thing about the technology, is that it is a roll your sleeves up and hey, you guys get involved and participate in the process. So I think that's good. Probably it's raised a higher expectation of the delivery mode, that it needs to be visual and engaging and quality rather than just the old form. But I think that probably lifts the professionalism anyway, and makes sure that the content is delivered in time and in context and is applied to the specific learner group. And if we get those ingredients right, it's great stuff. It's really going to have an impact.
Excellent. And the trend we're now seeing is much greater mobility in terms of the number of jobs and the number of careers that people have. How do you see that organisations, can effectively respond to engaging and retaining people, or should they just accept there will be that mobility and adapt accordingly?
Yeah, I think there has to be some certain amount of accepting the reality that we won't keep people up until that 10-year long service leave. That's not going to be a mainstream experience anymore. But we don't have to all either equally accept 1 or 2 year turnovers. We can do better than that. And often we've found in our research, one of the reasons people leave is not that they don't like the company, they just get bored of the job. They don't particularly dislike the management, they just feel they're not engaged in the process. So by getting some of those key ingredients right, broader job descriptions, ongoing training and development, leadership opportunities, a career job trajectory, work-life balance, flexibility, and some ownership over the process and where they're headed. And I think non-monetary benefits in addition to the remuneration that's right. I think if we get that right, we can retain people longer. And we need the balance. You don't want too little turnover, but at the same time, you can't have too much of it. Otherwise, it's just too much flux and it's too dynamic, and you're losing a lot of that knowledge. So I think if we get a good balance, and 3 to 6 years sort of tenure somewhere in there is going pretty well, then I think there's the stability, but also the innovation. I think the mix is positive.
And do you see that we're going to need a fairly significant change in leadership style from perhaps the more senior people in organisations to adapt, to encourage that that change that's going to happen with mobility?
Yeah, definitely. We're trying to create innovative organisations that are flexible and adaptive, and so it means the leadership has to model that. And we can't just rely on experience alone, or authority alone, or structures alone. We can't just do it because we've always done it. And so that does require a certain amount of transparency of leader and vulnerability indeed, and involving others in the process, this shift to the participation model, the flat structure. I think that if we can get that right, it's going to be a workplace that people really feel valued in, and that they can make a contribution. It's the leadership styles that people expect these days, and we're going to retain people longer. So it's got all of the benefits, but it does require the leaders to make some adjustments away from those traditional leadership models.
Yes. And how does education need to adapt to meet the needs of the younger generation coming through, and the likelihood they will have a whole range of different careers as they move around?
Well, we're seeing education continue to change, which is great, away from just learning as an outcome in itself, the content as the goal, through to the learning process and picking up skills, learning how to learn, rather than just, a focus on that curricular area alone. And I think that's been good. Teachers have shifted from the deliverer of content to the facilitator of learning. I think that's great. And teachers recognising that learning has to develop the people skills. It's about learning in context and in a social culture, rather than just the pen and paper of old. And so I think schools have been quite innovative. They're even changing the learning spaces, obviously the tools that students are learning on. I think that's great. But it's important that learning is an enjoyable experience, because these young people need to be lifelong learners. They need to finish their schooling after 13 years, not only with good knowledge and some good skills, but a love for learning, so that they can truly be the lifelong learner, and they'll plug back into education throughout their lives, which they're going to need to upskill and retrain for all of those different jobs that they're going to hold.
Yep. And look, we've seen a lot happen in the first half of this decade. If we fast forward to 2020, what do you expect we might be doing then that's not on the horizon at the moment?
Yeah, well, a lot of the things, if we were to step into 2020 now, would be recognisable to us. It's half a decade away, so clearly we're going to recognise a lot of the elements, but they will be done in different ways. And I think that even work, we're going to see more of that teleworking. People increasingly will be balancing their day. I think that the learning tools will become easier and more intuitive. They will become just almost integrated into our lifestyle, rather than the computer that we pick up and interact on. I think that we will blur even more the key areas or priorities of life, like our social and our recreational and our entertainment, even within the workspace. We're going to have work campuses with campus managers that can create some of those opportunities for the social interaction, as work becomes a key crossroads where we expect to have greater needs met. And I think that even around shopping, we're going to see that become, again, more intuitive into our lives. We will have the Internet of Things take care of some of that, almost creating virtual shopping lists, as the barcode reader in our fridges and pantries recognises when items are running low and updates our e-shopping list, which will be on our wearable device, which will then tap at the store when we get there, which will direct us to the most efficient pathway to buy those goods. So the shopping centre will still be obvious to us, but some of the interfacing that stands behind that experience will be new. And if we've seen a lot of change in the last 5 years, I think the next 5 will be produce phenomenally more. And it's going to be an exciting time. I think it'll be a good era, with us using technology to solve many of the emerging problems of today. But the timeless relational aspect of life will still be there. It'll be like life today, only better. That's what I think.
Excellent. Well, look, thank you very much for joining us for the chat and sharing your insights with Deakin Prime.
Thanks so much, Simon.